Why dark empaths target avoidance. The intersection of dark empathy and avoidant attachment creates a psychological dynamic that few people understand, yet many experience. Dark empaths possess both cognitive empathy and dark triad traits, making them uniquely skilled at identifying and exploiting the vulnerabilities of avoidantly attached individuals. This isn't random predation. It's a calculated pattern driven by psychological compatibility that benefits the dark empath while leaving the avoidant person emotionally drained and confused. Understanding the dark empath profile. Dark empaths represent approximately 20% of the population according to recent psychological research. Unlike traditional empaths who feel others' emotions and respond with compassion, dark empaths understand emotions cognitively without the accompanying care or concern. They can read your facial expressions, decode your body language, and predict your emotional responses with remarkable accuracy. But here's the critical distinction. They use this information strategically rather than compassionately. These individuals score high on measures of narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy while simultaneously demonstrating cognitive empathy. This combination creates someone who knows exactly how you feel and precisely how to manipulate those feelings for personal gain. They're not sadistic for entertainment. They're calculating in their approach, using emotional intelligence as a weapon rather than a bridge to genuine connection. The dark empath's toolkit includes charm, strategic vulnerability, and carefully timed emotional displays. They mirror your interests, validate your feelings when it serves them, and create an illusion of deep understanding. This false intimacy becomes the foundation for later exploitation, and avoidantly attached individuals are particularly susceptible to this pattern. The avoidant attachment blueprint. Avoidant attachment develops in childhood when caregivers are emotionally unavailable, dismissive, or inconsistently responsive. Children learn that expressing needs leads to rejection or indifference, so they adapt by becoming self-reliant and emotionally distant. By adulthood, this manifests as difficulty with intimacy, discomfort with emotional vulnerability, and a tendency to withdraw when relationships become too close. Avoidants value independence above connection. They maintain emotional distance through various strategies, including intellectualization, minimizing the importance of relationships, and creating physical or emotional space when partners seek closeness. This isn't conscious cruelty. It's a deeply ingrained protective mechanism developed to avoid the pain of unmet emotional needs. The avoidant person often appears strong, independent, and self-sufficient on the surface. They handle practical matters competently, make decisions without excessive input from others, and rarely appear needy or desperate. This facade of strength masks a deep-seated fear of dependency and vulnerability. They've learned that needing others equals pain, so they've structured their entire emotional life around avoiding that pain. Why avoidants become prime targets. Dark empaths target avoidants for several strategic reasons that align perfectly with their manipulative needs. First, avoidants don't demand emotional intimacy or consistent attention. The dark empath can pursue multiple relationships or focus their energy elsewhere without triggering the protests or demands that more securely attached individuals might make. The avoidance independence provides the dark empath with freedom to operate without accountability. Second, avoidants are less likely to question inconsistent behavior or emotional unavailability. Because they themselves struggle with intimacy and consistency, they normalize these patterns in partners. When the dark empath disappears for days, provides contradictory information, or fails to follow through on commitments, the avoidant accepts this more readily than someone with secure attachment would. They interpret it through their lens of independence rather than recognizing it as manipulation. Third, avoidants typically have strong boundaries around emotional expression, but weak boundaries around being used. They'll refuse to discuss their feelings but agree to help with projects, lend money, or provide resources without reciprocation. The dark empath exploits this imbalance, taking practical support while providing just enough emotional crumbs to keep the avoidant engaged. Fourth, avoidants are skilled at rationalizing and intellectualizing emotional situations. When something feels wrong, that they analyze it logically rather than trusting their emotional responses. The dark empath leverages this tendency by providing logical explanations for harmful behavior. The avoidant's mind accepts these explanations even when their gut knows something is wrong, creating cognitive dissonance that the dark empath exploits repeatedly. Dark empaths don't pursue avoidance with overwhelming intensity. They understand that avoidants flee from excessive attention or premature emotional demands. Instead, they employ a measured approach that respects the avoidant's need for space while creating intrigue and connection. The dark empath initially mirrors the avoidant's independence. They demonstrate their own self-sufficiency, share stories of solo adventures, and emphasize their comfort with solitude. This creates perceived compatibility and safety. The avoidant thinks they've found someone who understands their need for space, someone who won't become clingy or demanding. This false sense of security lowers the avoidant's defenses. During this phase, the dark empath offers strategic vulnerability. They share carefully selected personal information that seems deep and meaningful but actually reveals nothing important. They might discuss a past disappointment or acknowledge a minor insecurity, creating the illusion of emotional openness without genuine risk. The avoidant, who rarely encounters this kind of sharing, interprets it as exceptional trust and connection. The dark empath also validates the avoidant's worldview. If the avoidant believes relationships are complicated and people are generally unreliable, the dark empath agrees and shares similar perspectives. This validation reinforces the avoidant's existing beliefs while positioning the dark empath as someone different, someone who truly understands. It's a contradiction the avoidant doesn't notice because it feels so validating. Once basic trust is established, the dark empath implements intermittent reinforcement, a powerful psychological principle that creates addictive relationship patterns. They alternate between connection and withdrawal, warmth and coldness, attention and neglect. This unpredictability triggers the avoidant's nervous system in ways that steady, consistent attention never could. Avoidants are paradoxically drawn to this pattern because it aligns with their childhood experiences. Inconsistent emotional availability feels familiar, and humans are wired to pursue what's familiar even when it's harmful. The dark empath's intermittent presence creates just enough anxiety to keep the avoidant engaged without triggering their flight response through excessive closeness. When the dark empath withdraws, the avoidant experiences discomfort but doesn't typically protest or pursue. Instead, they wait, rationalize the distance as normal, and focus on other areas of life. This response actually reinforces the dark empath's behavior because it requires no accountability or explanation. The avoidant's acceptance of inconsistency gives the dark empath permission to continue the pattern. When the dark empath returns with attention or affection, the avoidant experiences relief and a dopamine hit similar to addiction. This biochemical response strengthens the bond despite the relationship's unhealthy dynamics. The cycle repeats with increasing intensity, and the avoidant becomes progressively more invested in someone who provides decreasing emotional returns. Dark empaths recognize that avoidants prefer demonstrating care through actions rather than words or emotional expression. They exploit this by positioning themselves as needing practical help while being emotionally unavailable. They ask the avoidant to help with projects, provide professional connections, offer financial assistance, or contribute time and resources to their endeavors. The avoidant complies because helping feels safer than emotional intimacy. They can demonstrate care without vulnerability, maintain their sense of independence while being useful, and avoid the discomfort of emotional conversations. The dark empath frames these requests as mutual benefit or unique opportunities, never as exploitation, and the avoidant's logical mind accepts these frames. Over time, the relationship becomes increasingly one-sided in terms of practical support, while remaining emotionally distant for both parties. The avoidant provides resources, time, and energy, while receiving minimal emotional connection or reciprocal support. They don't recognize this imbalance as problematic, because emotional reciprocity wasn't their primary need anyway. They notice they're exhausted but can't identify why. The dark empath maintains plausible deniability throughout this process. They never explicitly demand help or claim entitlement to the avoidant's resources. Instead, they present situations where helping seems logical, beneficial, or simply the right thing to do. The avoidance tendency to intellectualize prevents them from recognizing the manipulation pattern until significant damage has occurred. The gaslighting dynamic. When avoidants do express concerns or discomfort, dark empaths employ sophisticated gaslighting techniques adapted to the avoidant's specific vulnerabilities. They don't use the dramatic, obvious gaslighting tactics that would trigger the avoidance flight response. Instead, they use subtle invalidation wrapped in apparent logic and understanding. The dark empath might say things like, "You're being too analytical about this," or "You're overthinking like you always do," which simultaneously invalidates the avoidance concerns while using their tendency toward intellectualization against them. They frame the avoidance legitimate observations as personality flaws or excessive analysis rather than accurate perceptions of problematic behavior. They also exploit the avoidance difficulty with emotional expression by suggesting that any complaint or concern is overly emotional or irrational. Since avoidants pride themselves on logic and self-control, being labeled as emotional or irrational triggers shame and self-doubt. The avoidant retreats from their accurate perceptions and accepts the dark empath's reframing of reality. Another common tactic involves appealing to the avoidant's fear of being controlled or constrained. When the avoidant sets a boundary or expresses a need, the dark empath frames it as the avoidant being demanding or trying to control them. This triggers the avoidant's core fear of being like the clingy, needy people they've always avoided. They immediately back down, abandoning legitimate boundaries to avoid being perceived as controlling. The illusion of mutual independence. Dark empaths maintain the relationship by preserving an illusion of mutual independence and respect for autonomy. They frame their unavailability and inconsistency as healthy independence rather than neglect or manipulation. They praise the avoidant for not being needy or demanding, reinforcing the avoidant's belief that their emotional distance is a strength rather than a wound. This dynamic creates a relationship where both parties claim to value independence while actually engaging in a codependent pattern of exploitation and acceptance. The avoidant believes they are in a healthy, boundaried relationship with someone who respects their space. The dark empath knows they're in a relationship where they face no accountability while receiving ongoing benefits. The dark empath periodically reinforces this illusion by celebrating the avoidant's independence or expressing gratitude for their understanding nature. These moments of validation feel significant to the avoidant because they rarely receive recognition for their emotional style. They interpret this as evidence that they've finally found someone who truly gets them, not recognizing that they're being manipulated through validation of their maladaptive patterns. Recognition is the first step toward breaking this destructive pattern. Avoidants must understand that their attachment style, while protective, creates specific vulnerabilities that manipulative individuals exploit. This isn't about self-blame but about self-awareness and empowerment through understanding. Avoidants need to develop emotional literacy and learn to trust their gut feelings even when they can't immediately intellectualize them. If something feels wrong, it probably is, regardless of whether it can be logically explained. This requires practicing emotional awareness and validating internal responses, rather than dismissing them as irrational or overly sensitive. Setting and maintaining boundaries around practical support is crucial. Avoidants must learn to distinguish between reciprocal relationships and exploitative ones by tracking the balance of give and take over time. If they're consistently providing resources, time, or support without receiving comparable investment, the relationship is likely exploitative regardless of how it's framed. Therapy specifically focused on attachment issues can help avoidants develop healthier relationship patterns and recognize manipulation tactics. Working with a therapist who understands both attachment theory and personality disorders provides the avoidant with tools to identify dark empaths early and disengage before significant damage occurs. Finally, avoidants benefit from building relationships with securely attached individuals who can model healthy emotional expression and consistent behavior. These relationships feel uncomfortable initially because they lack the familiar push-pull dynamic. but they provide the safety and consistency necessary for healing and growth. The pattern of dark empaths targeting avoidance is predictable, preventable, and ultimately escapable. Understanding the dynamics empowers avoidants to protect themselves while developing the emotional skills necessary for genuine connection. Recognition transforms vulnerability into strength, and awareness becomes the foundation for healthier relationship choices moving forward. The pattern of dark empaths targeting avoidance is predictable, preventable, and ultimately escapable. Understanding the dynamics empowers avoidants to protect themselves while developing the emotional skills necessary for genuine connection. Recognition transforms vulnerability into strength, and awareness becomes the foundation for healthier relationship choices moving forward.